Hey witches, Tiffany here on Bewitching.Bemused, and today I've got another book review for you. Today I'm covering the book Moon Spells by Diane Ahlquist. Now this is not to be confused with the book Moon Magic by Diane Ahlquist, which, to be honest, is what I thought I was getting when I got this book. To be honest, I wasn't paying much attention and I didn't realize that they both existed, and to be fair, they look pretty much exactly the same, except one says Moon Magic, the other says Moon Spells, and one is a dark gray and the other is black. So just don't make the same mistake I did, and just be aware of which one I'm talking about here. So this book is 256 pages, and if you happen to be interested on checking it out yourself, the link is down below in the description box. So overall, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I was not a fan of this book. So the book is called Moon Spells, like I said, and you would think therefore that it's a spell book full of spells that work with the moon. That would make it a specialized book, right? Well, typically when you pick up a specialized book, it skips over all of the introductory basics of, spell casting and witchcraft, because it assumes that if you're picking up something specialized, you already know all those things. I'm talking about things like casting a circle, cleansing your space, altar tools, making sure you have no distractions. And see, this is why you don't see books on advanced witchcraft, because usually, you read those very general introductory beginner's books that cover the basics. Once you get those down, you usually start to see what areas you're most interested in. By the time you are ready for advanced witchcraft, you know your niche. So like I said, you learn all of those generalized beginner's books, you learn all those basics, and then you move on to the specialized books, the ones that will add to your specific brand of witchcraft. I've learned I like working with the moon. I feel very in tune with the moon, excuse the rhyming. So I was looking for books specifically about working with the moon, but that's not really what this was, which was kind of a big disappointment. Because of that, I would say this is just a beginner's book. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it does disguise itself as a specialized book. And almost the entirety of the first half of the book is pretty much all just beginner's introductory material. But you guys know I like to stay unbiased. I think this is actually my first video where I talked about a book that I didn't really care for, so I'm still of course going to weigh out the things that I did like about it, because I want you all to make your own informed decisions. This is just my opinion and my review. If the book still sounds interesting to you, then by all means go out and get it. I'm not saying don't read it. Again, this is just my thoughts. So here are the pros. Let's pretend for a minute that this book was not marketed as a specialized book. Let's say it's marketed as just a basic book of spells. So Ahlquist did include, as I mentioned, a lot of basic introductory material that was relevant because it would be used later when you're casting the spells that are in the book. It's there to help you understand why you're doing some of the things that you're doing in these spells and how to be prepared to cast a spell. And you know what? A lot of spell books don't do that. And now, to be fair, spell books don't have to do that because they're spell books. They're not advertising themselves as beginner's books on, things to know before you start casting spells. There are other books out there that do that just fine. So there's nothing wrong with a spell book not covering these things, but I do kind of like that they're in here. She describes the uses of things like the 4 directions and the 4 elements, color correspondences for candles, which is great because later on, she tells you, hey, use these 3 candles in these 3 colors, and you can just flip that back through the book and see why she chose those particular colors. As you guys know, I'm not a huge fan of spell books in general, but if you're gonna go out and buy one, I would always much rather know, okay, why did the author select these ingredients? Well, it's right there in the book. Another thing that I rarely see talked about is using different formations aside from a circle. Now, of course, the circle is a classic, and there are a lot of reasons why most of us use that shape. But Ahlquist did include a section of other potential shapes that you could use and the meanings behind them. Times that you might want to use a triangle or a square as opposed to a circle or in addition to a circle. So I thought that was pretty cool. Another thing that I really liked, because it's something that I completely agree with, Ahlquist spends a section talking about the importance of setting up the right atmosphere before you cast a spell in your space. Now, I'm not just talking about cleansing, but also things like setting the right mood, dimming the lights, lighting some candles, lighting some incense, just to get you in the right headspace for ritual. Not necessarily things that correspond directly with your spell, although of course they can, but things that are specifically meant just to calm you, relax you, but still keep you alert and aware and help you focus and just get into what I like to call the witchy state of mind. I really like this because we often hear about, make sure you have no distractions, cleanse your space, cast your circle, have everything ready to go, but I don't often hear having that atmosphere talked about that often. Now, is it always necessary? No, but sometimes it can really go a long way to help you get the right focus and kind of the right witchy feels to feel prepared to do your spell. And that can really go a long way with your focus. Now for the next one, I'm going to read a quote directly from the book. Diane Ahlquist says, "Any tangible item used for ritual can be considered a magical tool as long as it means something special to you." Thank you. I love this. It's something that needs to be said more often. It's something that I agree with wholeheartedly. And this is just one example of many times that Ahlquist is very, very practical in her suggestions. If you've watched, more than a handful of my videos, you guys know I like to throw those gates wide open. No gatekeeping. You don't have to buy all of your tools or your ingredients straight from a metaphysical shop. Use what works. Use what you have on hand. Use what you can afford, what you have easy access to. As long as it holds meaning for you, it will do the job. Another example of that is her talking about, if you don't have the space in your living area to set up your altar facing a specific direction that some other book told you your altar should be facing, that's fine. Just put it wherever it works, where you live. For the most part, and well, not entirely, and I'll get to this in the cons section, most of the spells call for very simple ingredients. And I like that it also includes a list of additional items that you can use, but they're not completely necessary. If you have them or if you can easily get them, they will enhance your spell, sure, but you don't, she doesn't list 12 different items, half of which are expensive or really difficult to find. And finally, Ahlquist does include a pretty good variety of spells, although admittedly for a book on spells, there really aren't that many, but you'll see them from lots of different, life genres, such as love, career, health, spirituality, you get it. Okay, now it's time for the cons. This first one is probably one of the biggest ones, and I'm going to give you multiple examples as I go down my cons list. For a book titled Moon Spells that has such a long introductory section before, actually getting to the spells, there's very little about the moon. Ahlquist does use a section to kind of just give a brief description of, the moon phases and different things, that you might want to manifest during each of those times. But that's about it. Again, I'll get back to the lack of moon-specific sections in a bit. Another thing that kind of didn't sit right with me was there was a bit of cultural appropriation. There's no mention of ethical harvesting. She says you can just go pick up white sage at any New Age store, which sure, it doesn't have to be put in the book. It should be upon the consumer to look into purchasing from places that buy ethically, but if this is a beginner's book, which it absolutely is, a lot of people who are reading it may not already be aware of that. She also uses the term smudge when she actually means cleanse. And at one point, she even mentions the Native American medicine wheel, and she even goes on to state that using it requires extensive knowledge of Native American beliefs. So that just kind of feels at odds with not acknowledging that something like smudging is a part of a closed Native American practice. practice. And she doesn't clarify that it's not the same thing as smoke cleansing. Now, I mentioned earlier that, in a lot of her advice, she's very practical, but there are some things that are a little bit limiting. For instance, Ahlquist gives instructions on how to collect element water and how to use it. Element water is collected during a storm that has both thunder and lightning. Now, she even says that these can be pretty rare, and of course, as we all know, this especially depends upon where you live. Now, this wouldn't be a big deal, except that she mentions how rare it is, and yet it gets used as one of the main ingredients in the very first spell in the book. And there's no alternatives listed of another ingredient you could use instead, or perhaps a different way that you can make a different type of element water. To add on to that, there are absolutely no instructions or, if I recall correctly, even so much of a mention of any type of lunar water. Like, if you're gonna spend a section talking about how to make a type of water in a book called Moon Spells, you would think that at the very least it would be full moon water or new moon water, but... So I just thought it was weird. If you're gonna spend a section talking about magical water, why not also just kind of add in like how to charge up and make some full moon water, some new moon water. Anyway, on to my next point. Every spell in the book does have a section in it with a list of things to make sure to do prior to your spell. Now, the way it's formatted, these are bullet points. But the thing is, it's just a list of things that she already talked about in the introduction. Like, it's not that big of a deal because, yes, you could just skip over it. But I know that if I'm doing a spell out of a spell book and I'm following the instructions directly from the book, I don't want to have to skip over chunks of text. I also don't need reminders to be told to mute my phone, make sure there's no distractions before I do a spell, especially if I just read about those things earlier in that same book. And like I said, this is on every single spell. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Some people might find these little reminders to be helpful, especially beginners. And to be honest, some of the things included were very specific to that very spell, of course, and those ones I could see being useful. But again, I don't need to be reminded to mute my phone. I just didn't care for it myself, and it did kind of feel like extra fluff to make the book longer. Now, going back to the lack of moon talk in the Moon Spells book. While the spells do tell you, a suggestion of one or a few different moon phases under which to do the spell, that's about the extent of the lunar connection. Only a small handful of the spells actually call to the moon or even mention it in the incantation. It's like, well, there's also a suggestion for which days of the week you could do the spell on, so this could just as easily be a book called Days of the Week Spells, especially because just like there was a description about the moon phases, there was also a description about days of the week earlier in the book. It really just felt like a general spell book as opposed to lunar specific spells. This was a big turnoff for me. I wanted something that would give me spells and inspiration for spells that called directly to the moon. I also wanted things that would help me connect to the moon, but there were absolutely none of those. Then at the end of the book, there is a section that covers some additional things that you might want to study on your own as part of a basic witchcraft practice, such as astrology and numerology. Yes, that's nice for a beginner's book once again, but none of it had anything to do with the moon. My final con, and well, this one's kind of mixed because it's not entirely bad. There is a section of spells specifically for women and a section of spells specifically for men. I do really like that there is a section for men included because this is not often the case, and in fact, I feel like, male witches or male identifying witches are very often just kind of swept under the rug. But here's my issue with those sections. They are fairly exclusionary. Most of these spells have to do with some form of reproduction. There's one for fatherhood, one for fertility, one for an easy childbirth, all of which could have made up a single section that was non-gender specific about family. There's also a love spell in each section, one for women only and one for men only. And it does specifically say women only and men only. I looked over both, and while the one for women to cast does call upon feminine energy, the one in the men's section doesn't call upon masculine energy. In fact, the one for men only doesn't really seem male specific whatsoever. Although I will say that I do like that both spells are general enough that neither seem to kind of, make assumptions about the reader or the spellcaster's sexual orientation. Okay, and then final note on that section on the last con of the list is that the introduction to the fatherhood spell really rubbed me the wrong way. Ahlquist does take a moment to acknowledge the existence of toxic masculinity, and that in today's society, unfortunately, men are often expected to be stoic and emotionless. That is true, and it's extremely problematic. And if she had just stopped right there and left it at that, I would have had no problem with it. But then she goes on to compare men's and women's reproductive rights. And Ahlquist goes on to state, and I'm going to quote directly from the book here, "A woman has the legal right to decide whether she is going to be a mother or not." I'm sure I don't even need to mention why this is problematic. She does go on to say that men do not get that choice. They do not have the legal right. And that if a woman is pregnant and decides to have the child, he's a father whether he likes it or not. Well, in many, many, many places, women do not have that legal right. I don't care if you're talking about the access to birth control or abortion. That statement that women have a legal right to decide to be a mother or not is absolutely not true. It just really bothered me that this statement was written as objective fact when it is not. And just to be clear, this was a statement written in the introduction to a spell for somebody who wants to do a spell to ensure that they're a good father. So, how did discussing the differences in men's and women's reproductive rights have anything to do with that spell? It didn't. It had nothing to do with it. It served no purpose. It just felt like a really kind of strange political tangent that was not at all necessary and not even factually correct. Things were stated as facts when they sounded more like opinions or just weren't facts, period. Okay, I had a couple of other things for the cons list, but I feel like I've kind of gone on long enough. You guys get the general idea. I covered the ones that I kind of thought were the biggest red flags, at least in my opinion. Again, I'm not telling you don't buy this book. I'm just saying, personally, I wasn't a fan. There were things about it that I did like, but there were a lot of things about it that I didn't care for. If this book had been dressed and marketed as a non-specific, non-specialized beginner's book, I think it would have been okay. Pretty average, and I probably still wouldn't be a big fan of certain things in it, but overall, I would have thought it was an okay book. But if I'm being completely honest, this one was a pretty disappointing read. Now, I might, give her other book, Moon Magic, a try. But to be honest, I'm not gonna purchase it. I'm gonna get it from the library. And when I do so, I will definitely let you guys know if I like that one any better. Again, if you're curious about checking it out for yourself and formulating your own opinions, I dropped a link down below in the description box. Don't forget that this coming Sunday, July 18th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is our live stream. I do have a topic for it, but still come prepared with questions to ask and things to talk about. As always, you can reach me in the links down below. Anyway, I will see you all on Sunday. Hopefully you guys will have time to be able to tune in live because I love hanging out with you and chatting with you all. But until then, make sure stay magical.